What's good, ladies and gents? Welcome back to MKO Boxing, aka MKO Pugilism, where we talk all things boxing. Remember to like and subscribe on YouTube, follow me on TikTok, all that good stuff. And yeah, let's get into this one. So, obviously, in the aftermath of the very controversial ending of Alexander Usyk versus Rico Verhoeven took place on Saturday night. A lot of people are kind of writing Alexander Usyk off. A lot of people are saying Rico will sort of batter him in the rematch and Rico wins the next time. And I think a lot of people are kind of prisoners of the moment. And I can't blame them, to be honest, because it was such a surprise. Alexander Usyk looked very bad in this fight, and Rico Verhoeven, I think he surprised Usyk, and he surprised the fans. He surprised all of us boxing fans who, like myself, had it as a complete mismatch going into the fight. So, for me, I think regarding why Usyk looked so bad and what he'll do in a rematch. I think one of the reasons that he looked bad in this fight was, I would say, age is definitely a factor because Usyk is not far off 40. I think he's about 39 and a half now, so he's getting on in age, and I think in that fight we did see a few signs of decline. It was a lot more sort of flat-footed. Some of the opportunities that were there for him to take, he didn't take them or wasn't able or was looking to be too precise. But there were certain opportunities in there where he didn't take them. So I think age at this point was definitely a factor in him looking as bad as he did. I would say also another factor that made him look bad in his fight was perhaps overconfidence. Now, I know Usyk is a consummate professional. I know that Usyk is a guy that does leave no stone unturned, but I think the fact of his weight being around 12 pounds, I think between 10 and 12 pounds over his normal fighting weight, I think that showed that there was perhaps an element of overconfidence in there, and not overconfidence in that you're going to be braggadocious and talking smack about your opponent, but I think overconfidence in the sense of Usyk, like the rest of us, had this as a complete mismatch going into it. So, you're a pound for pound great boxer, and you're fighting a novice who's a kickboxer who's only had one fight. So going into that fight, even as a consummate professional, undefeated guy that does his training correctly and everything, going into that fight, you're going to be confident. You're going to be super confident because you're fighting a guy that you should walk through. You should KO. You should, a guy that doesn't really pose any real threat to you, a guy that doesn't pose any threat. So him knowing that going into this, I think probably did produce an element of overconfidence in Alexander Usyk, because regardless how professional you are, you're fighting a novice. So you're not going to have the same fear factor that you would have had for the other guys that you fought, because they're boxers and you've seen what they've done in a ring, and there's at least like a chance you in your head that, oh, they can beat me, they're dangerous, I know this about them, I know that about them. There's going to be a fear factor there when you're fighting a known quantity, whereas in this element you're fighting an unknown quantity, but he's a novice. So I think there was an element of overconfidence which probably made him, perhaps maybe not physically neglecting the gym, but maybe there's, I suppose, a lack of intensity in what he was doing. And I think mentally, even if it wasn't physically, mentally in his head, he's thinking, well, this is a mismatch. This is going to be easy because on paper, it should have been easy. On paper, it was easy. On paper, it was ridiculous. So I think in his head, he'd be thinking this is easy. So the element of overconfidence there, I think, contributed to him looking bad in the fight. And I think also the element of surprise was a massive factor. I think that was the main factor that made Usyk look bad in his fight, was that Rico Verhoeven's approach to the fight, and Alexander Usyk not really knowing or seeing anything of him before in terms of how he boxes and the hunched over style and the busyness with the hands. I honestly think that as good as Alexander Usyk was, it was like Jim Carrey and Me, Myself and Irene, that crazy, moving the hands all the time. And I honestly think that he doesn't have much boxing experience, but he confused Usyk, and I think that element of surprise of not knowing what the guy's going to come with, and he comes with this crazy style. I honestly think it took Usyk a long while, most of the fight, to get used to it and to kind of get his timing down, which was a massive credit to Rico Verhoeven, because to not even be a boxer and to be able to do that, to be able to confuse a great fighter like Alexander Usyk and be unorthodox to the point where he's not figuring you out and he's not really landing on you, it was incredible. I think the element of surprise was also a big factor in why Usyk looked so poor and looked so bad. And really, I think when we come now to speaking of a rematch, which is, for me, has got to be on the table. I think personally, probably Usyk should, because Caballero's been waiting for so long, I think he's got to probably fight him first. But then I think after him, after Caballero, it's got to be the Rico rematch. Because I think the Caballero, because he's been in that position, he's earned it, his thing should be first for me. And for, boxing wise, it makes sense because Rico did fantastic, but we can't forget that he didn't earn his shot. He was put there for the shot. So, for me, I think in a rematch, Alexander Usyk beats Verhoeven, and I think he beats him quite comfortably. Probably stops him again. I would estimate at an earlier point in the fight. And I say that, and I know people will disagree because of how awkward Rico was and how well he done the first fight. But I think now with Usyk having the knowledge and having the understanding, having the experience of being in there with Rico Verhoeven, and Usyk facing Verhoeven on his worst night, I think now after that fact, you put them in there again in the ring in a rematch, and I think Usyk does a number on him. Usyk does a job on him, because now the element of surprise, which was the biggest factor, the biggest weapon that Verhoeven had, and he used it to his advantage in the unorthodox style and all of this and, whatnot. I think now going into a rematch, Usyk deals with him and Usyk stops him. For me, I reckon Usyk stops him, because now the unknown is out the window. Now he knows what to expect, and I think he'll read him better and he'll deal with him a lot easier and probably take him out in the rematch. I think Verhoeven will have his pockets of success, but I think having downloaded the data and having pulled it out of the bag in the 11th round, for me, Usyk wins, and he wins inside the distance in a rematch. Let me know your thoughts, and until next time, it's MKO Boxing, over and out.